Hi, so I first found out about you on 4chan, which I just wanted to take a quick peek. Who here uses it or has gone on it? Okay, like not, oh, okay. So people are admitting it. So it's an anonymous chat board. And I think because of that reason, people feel like they can say anything. Maybe something is lost because on Facebook, when your reputation is tied to all the opinions that you feel like you might want to test out, but on a place where it's anonymous, it's not, it's dark. And you have an international appeal. You have this, if I start a Jordan Peterson thread, within 5 minutes I've got people from 10 different countries, even countries that don't have English as their main language are joining in and talking about you. You know, the man who yells out that emperor has no clothes. And you know, we talk about how archetypes seem to manifest. What are you?
You know, the best person to answer that is actually not me. It's my wife. Because she knows what I am, and you know, it's not all that great, all things considered.
Well, from an archetypal point of view, what has manifested? What are you embodying that seems to? I mean, we don't need to see your real ugly face.
Jesus, that's a... Look, I told you the story at the beginning of the lecture. I've been trying to solve a problem. And I've really done everything I can to try to solve that problem. And I've been talking about what I learned and who I learned it from for 30 years, you know, and that's had a positive impact, as far as I can tell, on the people to whom I've taught it. And so I'm someone who's tried to solve the hardest problem that he could find. That's all. And, yeah.
Do you think individuals today should have a renewed relationship with religion and God to kind of rebuild the moral authority that you've talked about that's been lost?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think the question was, do I think that modern people should have a renewed relationship with religion and God? It's like, yes, absolutely. But it has to be predicated on higher consciousness, so to speak. And I mean that very technically. So this is what happened. This is how our religious systems developed. I'll give you the very brief version. So if you look at the structure of a chimpanzee troop or a wolf pack, there's an ethic. And there has to be, because otherwise the wolves would tear each other apart, and so would the chimpanzees. So the chimpanzees, in their dominance hierarchy structures, learn how to act out as society, just like the wolves do. So here's a rule for a wolf. Wolf A wants to be top dog, and Wolf B wants to be top dog, and so they snarl at each other, and they puff out their fur, and they look big and ferocious, and they turn sideways to scare each other, and then one of them chickens out and rolls over and shows his neck. And basically that is the acting out of, well, I'm a useless supplicant, and you know, your majesty can do what he will with me. And then the proper wolf king says, yeah, well, I might need your useless carcass to haul down a moose tomorrow, so I could tear out your throat, but I won't. And then they both get up and go along in the pack. And so the reason I'm telling you that is because there's an ethic there. Here's another ethic among animals. So if you take juvenile male rats, they need to play. They need to engage in rough and tumble play, or they develop attention deficit disorder, by the way, which is quite interesting and something to think about for your little rats in school that are developing attention deficit disorder. So if you take a juvenile rat and he knows he's going to be able to go in a space where he can play, he'll work to open a door to enter that space. So that's how you know he's motivated, because you can't ask him, because you can't speak rat, and neither can he. So you let the rat go in the play space, and you let another rat go in there of about the same age. Imagine one rat's 10% bigger than the other. So what happens first is the rats wrestle. It's not aggressive. They wrestle just like Worldwide Wrestling Federation guys wrestle, you know. And for many of the same reasons. And the rats will pin each other, and if you pin the other rat, you win. So if you're 10% bigger than the little rat, then you can always pin him. You can always win. Okay, so then what happens is the big rat becomes dominant and the little rat becomes subordinate, and they have a wrestling match, and then they part. The next time they meet, because it's an iterated game, the next time they meet, the little rat has to ask the big rat to play. And he does that the same way that you ask a child to play. You know, you do your play stance just like a dog does. You can understand when a dog does that. And so the little rat, you know, gets playful with the big rat, and then they play. But if you pair them repeatedly, the big rat has to let the little rat win at least 30% of the time, or the little rat won't invite him to play anymore. Right, that's cool. That's so cool, man. Jack Panksepp discovered that. He also discovered that if you tickled rats, they giggled, but they do it ultrasonically. So you have to, like bats. So he discovered the play circuit. It's a major neuroscience discovery. And so there's an emergent ethic in play, a fair play ethic. And now, hell, I can't remember what your question was. So oh yes, okay. So what happens is that there's an ethic that emerges out of social interaction. And then, because human beings are conscious, we watch that ethic emerge, and then we start telling stories about it. We tell stories about the honorable person. And the honorable person who doesn't just win today's game, but wins it in a way that makes everyone invite him to play games infinitely into the future, right? So that makes you the meta player. That's what you're trying to be. And that's the hero who goes into the unknown, right? It's the person who acts in proper interactions with other people. It's truly an emergent ethic. It's real. It's more real than anything else. We map that, and that's somehow associated with our consciousness. Well, we need to understand these sorts of things in order to put a biological structure underneath our religious thinking again, and to tie it into our scientific knowledge, and to become awake and aware of these sorts of things so that we can re-establish the foundation underneath our culture. And it's a terrifying thing to do because it does place a burden on people, right? But you want a burden. And it's so interesting. It's really one of the things that's also so cool about what's been happening. I don't understand this. I commented on this at the University of Toronto debate. The first thing I did, which was unexpected to me and everyone else, they didn't know what the hell I was doing, as I said, I looked around, I said, hey, you know, 80% of the people in this room are men. It's like, why is that? Something's going on here. And it's an indication that men and women have different interests. 91% of my viewers are men. What the hell? Why is that? Look at this room. It's almost all men. And men don't come to these sorts of things, generally speaking. Right? Maybe because they're stubborn and ornery. But so there's also something specifically in this for men. And by implication for women. Because what do you want? Useless men? No. You don't want useless men. That's for sure. Although, if you have a useless man, you get to dominate him. And so maybe that's not such a big price to pay for having someone around that you can treat like an infant. So that's the downside of the war between men and women. But a woman with any sense wants a man who's dangerous but tame. So maybe that's part of, well, we'll leave it at that.
I had a question regarding a remark that you made in a recent lecture where you characterized your classroom as as occupying the space of the cognitive elite, where they would have a general IQ of, say, 120 to 130. I just wanted to know if you could substantiate on that, given the fact that there is an extraordinary diverse range of disciplines which require different kinds of broad skills in the university. Also, with the kind of confounding variable that the university has may not be considered by some people to be the most exclusively the exclusive institution that it once was as a representation of the enlightened cognitive elite.
Okay, well, let me talk about the situation at the Ivy League universities first. The question, broadly speaking, covers a question about intelligence and about its diverse manifestations and about its role in selection for universities. If you go back and look at the records at Harvard, for example, in the early 1960s, the typical IQ for a Harvard student was about 105 to 110. Not much above average, but that's because they were finishing schools for the rich, roughly speaking. And you know, if you had a rich father and he made his money, he was probably well above average in intelligence. But if you were his offspring, there's regression towards the mean, so there's no reason to assume that by nature of your position you were going to be particularly intelligent. Anyways, the average Ivy League student was bright, but not outstandingly so. Now it's like IQ 145. It's 3 standard deviations above the mean. Because the reason for that is because they're selected by the SAT, Scholastic Aptitude Test. It's an IQ test. They won't say it's an IQ test, but that doesn't matter. It isn't it's an IQ test. It's as simple as that. any test that contains a sufficiently diverse range of problem-solving questions that's rank ordered in accuracy among people is an IQ test. The correlation's like 0.85. So, and what has happened, there's two things that have happened. I mean, the Ivy Leagues have got more and more selective because they can, and so the average IQ of their students has just continued to move upwards. And then the average IQ of the population has actually increased to a substantive degree too over the last 50 years, partly, perhaps mostly because of improved nutrition and information exposure among the more deprived members of the culture. It's better to watch TV than to sit alone in your crib, for example, and isolated. And people have enough food now, so the really low end of the intelligence spectrum has been truncated and the general population IQ has increased. So with regards to institutions like the University of Toronto, say, the average IQ at the University of Toronto is somewhere between 120 and 130. And we know that because we've tested it. And it's not surprising because you're basically selected for cognitive prowess, right? Because grades are a rough marker of intelligence. Conscientiousness, by the way, also matters. Independent trait. Because the best two predictors of university grades are conscientiousness and intelligence. Not creativity, by the way. Zero correlation with creativity. So, yes?
I'm very interested in your comments on this phrase, Western culture is committing suicide. Why is that happening?
Guilt.
Yes, what guilt? Expand please. Whose guilt? What guilt?
Well, there's lots for people to be guilty about. You know, I mean, you might say, to what degree should you bear the horrendous guilt of your ancestors? And that's a really hard question. I mean, because the radical left answer would be, to the degree that you're privileged by your ancestry, you should bear their guilt.
And what, commit suicide?
Well, yes, the question is then what do you do? Well, what you should do is, what I suggested today, I would say, is take responsibility for your lives and understand that what you have came at a terrible cost and that you have an ethical obligation to use it properly, and that would be sufficient to pay for the sins of your ancestors, so to speak. I think it's absolutely reprehensible that the radical left dares to attribute to ethnically identified groups collective guilt. There's absolutely no excuse for that. It's completely murderous, and that should be rejected out of hand. So, but that's independent of the issue about what you should do, given that part of your wealth is a consequence of historical catastrophe. So you should try to sort that out, roughly speaking, and for everyone's benefit, but not necessarily because you're any more guilty personally. You're guilty as hell personally, but so is everyone else. That's the critical thing. So is everyone else. Okay, I would like to answer that question, but I can't. And there's two reasons for that. The one is that there's a large element of the answer that has to be legal, and I can't do that. And the other part of it is because I'm actually too tired to formulate a coherent response to that. So, and I don't want to formulate an incoherent response. So I'm sorry that I can't be, I mean, obviously I believe that people's right to communicate should be as untrammeled as possible, but to bridge the gap between that and your specific concern requires a feat of mental energy that I can't do at the moment, and maybe ever. At the back?
Hi there. Just one quick note before I get into my two questions I have. As a gay male, I want to say thank you for speaking the truth on the whole pronoun thing, because that drives me absolutely ballistic in today's society. Now, two quick questions. I want to get your view on the social construct of a safe space that universities like my own here at Ottawa have tried to push on us.
Yeah.
And as well, I want to understand what your view on this whole white privilege thing is that universities like Ottawa, U of T, Ryerson, Yale, all these other universities are trying to cram down.
Yeah, well, I think the idea of white privilege is absolutely reprehensible. And it's not because white people aren't privileged. You know, we have all sorts of privileges, and most people have privileges of all sorts, and you should be grateful for your privileges and work to deserve them, I would say. But the idea that you can target an ethnic group with a collective crime, regardless of the specific innocence or guilt of the constituent elements of that group, there is absolutely nothing that's more racist than that. It's absolutely abhorrent. I can't... I mean, if you really want to know more about that sort of thing, you should read about the kulaks in the Soviet Union in the 1920s, Kulaks, because they were farmers who were very productive. They were the most productive element of the agricultural strata in Russia, and they were virtually all killed or raped and robbed by the collectivists, who insisted that because they showed signs of wealth, they were criminals and robbers. So, and one of the consequences of the prosecution of the kulaks was the death of 6 million Ukrainians from a famine in the 1930s. The idea of collectively held guilt at the level of the individual as a legal or philosophical principle is dangerous. It's precisely the sort of danger that people who are really looking for trouble would push. So, and just a cursory glance at 20th century history should teach anyone who wants to know exactly how unacceptable that is. With regards to your first, okay, there's the safe space issue, but you also said something right at the beginning. You announced your sexual preference at the beginning, and I understand exactly why you did that, but I have a comment about that. And this is something for people in the audience to think about. I've received at least 25 letters from transsexual people, and that's quite a few because there aren't that many transsexual people, right? So they're rare, they're very rare, and every single one of them but one was supportive. And the one that wasn't supportive was mildly critical, and they said exactly the same thing that you said, roughly speaking, is that, and so one of the things we want to remember is that just because some noisy activists stand up and say, because I'm a member of this group, or even worse, because I say I'm a member of this group, I am therefore an advocate for that group's interests, is we should just dispense with that self-identification as a worthy representative instantaneously, because it's predicated on the idea that one dimension of a person's identity is sufficiently what would you say, broad and all-encompassing, so that you can infer their political stance, for example, which you can't. And so the trans people that have written me, they all say the same thing. A, those people do not speak for me. B, we're not all the same. C, most of us think that the enforced pronoun issue is doing nothing but drawing negative attention to us. D, most of us just want to be referred to by the other pronoun. That's the whole point. So, so this has been very, very reassuring to me, because one of the things I presumed right from the onset was that there was no evidence whatsoever that this nonsensical legislation and the postmodern idiocy behind it is in fact demanded by this community, or that it will in any way be in anyone's best interest. No, I don't buy it. And I think it's rotten right to the core. So, and then the safe space issue. It's like, if you need a safe space, see a therapist. Really. University is not a safe space. If university is done right, it is a radically unsafe space. If you want to go somewhere and get yourself taken apart intellectually, and then hopefully put back together, then you go to university. Everything you believe should be challenged in every possible way, but not in a destructive sense, right? Like when you're renovating a house, you don't just burn it to the ground and walk away. That's what the postmodernists do to adolescents, by the way. You dismantle it in consultation with its occupant, attempting to build something more beautiful and functional on the foundation. It's not a safe space. In my classes, and I tell my students this right at the beginning, I'm trying to get them to understand why they are Nazis. Right, there isn't anything more unsafe than that. And all of them, virtually all of them, write back to me afterwards and say, this was the most worthwhile class I've ever had in my life, and it changed my life. It's like, well, I'm teaching you the worst possible thing about yourself. And your response is, oh, that was so useful, and I'm way better than I was. But it's in keeping with the idea that you need to be exposed to things that you fear and hate, because that's where salvation lies, roughly speaking. So, yes.
You mentioned how humanity seeks certainty, and also how the good we need to attain is essentially achieved through an act of faith, which is speaking the truth the best we can. And what I've been thinking about is, how can we have confidence in the existence and the good of the Logos? Is there anything to ground our confidence in it?
That's a great question. So what is there anything to ground our confidence in the Logos? Yeah, sure. Two things. One, the testimony of the ages. Two, practical experience. Try it. Try it. You know, and what you start by, while doing what I suggested earlier, which is fixing the things around you that you can fix. Because that's like the embodied manifestation of the Logos. That's, by the way, why Christ was a carpenter, archetypally speaking, right? Because he fixed things. So, and you know, if you're a bad carpenter, the things you fix fall apart. So there's truth in being a carpenter. But then the next thing is, you probably can't speak the truth because no one can. But you cannot say things you know to be lies. And that's a really good place to start. And you can learn to pay attention to that very rapidly. You kind of know already. But it's a consultation with your embodied being. When you say something you know to be false, you won't be able to stand up straight. You'll get weak. You'll feel a physical division take place inside you. It's partly shame, because you're failing to bear the burden of your existence, and you're revealing that to yourself by your use of deceit. Stop saying things you know to be false, and then watch what happens. And this is the existential element of it. It can't be proved, as far as I can tell, the same way that you would prove a scientific hypothesis. It can only be proved in the confines of your life. And you actually have to sacrifice your life to the Logos in order to find out. Because the only way you'll test it is by acting it out and see what happens. You don't get to do it twice. So, but I think the consequences will reveal themselves relatively quickly. My experience has been that, because I'm always working with my clients, and I see clinical clients 20 hours a week, roughly speaking, and we're always working on stating things more clearly, trying to make things better, you know, and it almost inevitably at least makes the horrible things bearable, which is a lot better, you know, and sometimes makes mediocre things way better as people's lives expand and they get more confident and straighten things out around them. So it's the testimony of the ages and your willingness to test it existentially in the confines of your own life. You'll find that there isn't anything more interesting than you can do, because it takes the stultifying predictability out of your life. You never know what will happen if you say something that's true. It's a miracle. Miracles will happen. And that's very interesting. It's crazily interesting. And so that's good. Crazily interesting. You've got that to set against tragedy. And so, well, so you can try it.